Greetings sailors and welcome back to World of Warships and a Patreon supporter replay. This one is from Isham Gamer and he's sent in his very first game in the Alexander Nevsky, which is the tier 10 tech tree light air quotes cruiser, except not really. It's 180mm guns just like its predecessor, the Donskoy, so it's not quite as beefy in firepower as the Moskva was, but it does have a better rate of fire for that, and it does still have very good AP shells and decent HE as well, alongside the ability to have both hydro and a radar, so that's all very nice. The armor's also pretty good, except when you turn broadside to Salem's and other things. So yeah, I think this was maybe a slightly too bold push, or maybe he should have just done what the Des Moines has done and actually gone into the cap instead of making that rather awkward turn and eating a bunch of nasty damage. However, that's probably his biggest misstep in this game, to be fair to him, so it will get better from here. That, by the way, that appears to be one of the steel camos. I've not really seen any of those up close and personal yet, so it took me a moment when I was watching the replay for the first time to figure out why exactly that Yamato looked a bit odd, and of course it's all shiny and chrome, so that'll be why. So he's done a little damage so far, but nothing too spectacular. He is going to have to, I think, maybe treat this a little more like the Donskoy. I mean, it's definitely tankier than the Donskoy. And when you actually look at the armor profile, the bow has that same 25mm upper and 50mm lower plates, which is what the Moskva had. But the Moskva also had a tougher Citadel armor plate behind that. So I think this is going to be a little more susceptible. It was, what, 170, 180mm on the athwartship Citadel, and this is like 130. So it's still reasonably good. But I don't know that I would trust this quite as much. So far so good. They've got 3 of the 4 caps, although the 2 centerline caps are being contested at the moment. Nobody's actually lost any ships yet. This is proving to be one of those games where it takes a little while for the first kill to happen, and it tends to happen more at higher tiers of this kind of game, where it takes 5, 6, 7 minutes sometimes for a kill to occur. But I think that's just the nature of high tier games generally. They do tend to be a bit more standoffish. People have the range and then therefore tend to use the range a lot more rather than getting up close and personal early on, because that's how close they have to get in order to use their guns. He does make some heavy use of his AP shells in this game overall, and like I said, the AP is very good, but against the angled Yamato, I mean, he's hitting the superstructure, but I'd have maybe tried to pin some fires on first before trying the AP. Although, you know, the AP has been giving good results here, but if you can stick some fires and then get those good results with the AP afterwards, that's going to be even more damage. So even though the HE isn't doing that much, he's now managed to get a fire going, and could possibly have switched back to the AP now, because this Yamato is just kind of chilling back there. They're not really manoeuvring around and making it difficult to aim for the superstructure in particular, but I guess he had the intent of trying to set more fires, perhaps, or maybe he considered this angle too unreliable to hit with the AP shells into the superstructure. You will notice he does quite a few times in this game flick his torpedo indicator on and off, which is one of the big advantages of any cruiser with torps, regardless of whether you actually have the range or not, is you can use them to check somebody's speed, if they're going forwards or backwards, and exactly how quickly they are going. So he definitely uses that to his full advantage, which was something you couldn't do in the Moskva. That, of course, did not have torps. But aside from that, the other big advantage this has, of long-range radar, he hasn't actually used yet, and I don't think he's really been in a position to use it, but if he got a bit closer to the middle at this point, perhaps he could light up the destroyer if they were in the open a bit. But the middle cap on this map is a bit awkward because you've got that big island there that people can just take cover behind. So it doesn't necessarily always do that much good to rush in there and radar. Anyway, so the enemy team's about to get that. There is a destroyer in the A cap, so they're only getting 1 cap points worth of victory points at the moment. They're also 2 ships down versus 1. So the enemy team is slightly ahead on points, but considering that we're now, what, 7.5 minutes into this game? Only 3 ships dead is remarkably few, all things considered. So yeah, this is apparently just a game where everyone's being quite standoffish. The 10 line on his own team is looking a bit awkward, I have to say. We've got a Des Moines and a destroyer there, and then way back a battleship. Is that a Pommern? Can't quite read the minimap. So that looks a little on the awkward side. And apart from himself and this Kurfürst in the middle, who's about to eat some of those Shima torps, everyone else is over on the west flank around the A cap. And I guess they're all just kind of more or less either doing what Isham is doing, which is firing HE from a distance in the case of things like the Zhao, which actually is that the only other cruiser left? No, the Des Moines still left alive as well. Or bow on tanking and firing against other bow on tanking battleships. Although we can see that that battleship that's down there is not doing so well. Although nor is this Grosser Kurfürst at this point, having eaten those torpedoes. It was only like 3 torps, but 3 torps from a Shimikaze is enough to do a fair bit of damage. He possibly could have even radared at this point, although I'm not sure the Shima would have been anywhere close enough to actually get picked up. So he's pew-pewing away at the Salem, who is bow on, so switching to HE, which will hopefully have a bit more effect. The superstructures are a little less big. Fortunately, with the damage done by the torpedoes, the Salem is then able to actually finish off that GK. In fact, was it even the Salem? It was somebody else's fire, I think. In some other unsettling news, the D cap is being taken, so we know there is a destroyer there. And the battleship that's back there is now in extreme danger, although we do have equally a friendly destroyer going for the... no, that's the D cap at the south, isn't it? It's the C cap that's being taken by the enemy right now. And as the A cap is still contested at the moment, although they are ahead on points, they are getting none at all right now. So that's not so great. They are at least ahead on ships, but not enough to make for a truly comfortable lead. It's only 2 ships ahead. And most of them are over on this side of the map now. That eastern flank, well, they just lost that. Oh, it's a Montana that was there. Okay. That eastern flank is now looking rather wobbly. I was trying to think of a suitable word there, but yeah, it's just the Des Moines and the Shima. And the carrier is quite possibly trying to find their Shima. It looks like they are sending those bombers in to try and spot, because I don't think they've got any radars nearby. Unless, is that last cruiser of theirs a Puerto Rico? I think it might be. So that could actually potentially be something that would cause the Shima problems. But it looks like the Shima's about to grab the cap. And they've also cleared out the A cap now, so they're back to at least being even on the number of caps taken. And meanwhile, as all that's been happening, this cap flipping and contesting, Isham's still just been plugging away and once again firing at the Salem, but this time he is right next to a carrier, the carrier, who has manoeuvred themselves more out into the open compared to where they were before, and that of course has gotten them spotted by the Salem, so they're now attracting quite a bit of fire, unsurprisingly. But once the Salem goes down, they will be unspotted, so they just need to kill this Salem double quick basically in order to stop their carrier taking too much more damage, and it's actually Isham that then manages to get the kill. So what's left? Well, they do have a nice advantage in terms of ships, but in terms of points it's still pretty close, just with the high amount of flipping and contesting of caps that's been going on in this game, which is actually a little unusual in my experience. This is perhaps a bit more of a back and forth than one usually sees at tier 10 games. But as Isham is pulling into the lee of this small island in A, presumably with the intent of using that to try and HE spam those battleships down south, well, that's when the Shima gets spotted by the carrier. And apparently they don't have any smokes to deploy because, well, they got spotted initially by planes, didn't smoke, and then now they're smoking, but that's at the point where Isham is finally in a position to use a radar, and so it was a bold move from the Shima, but it really hasn't worked out for them. Maybe it would have been smarter to try and go down and recap D, but as it is, that's the kind of the last sneaky ship of the enemy team that's done. But they did take down their own Shimakaze with torpedoes. So now both teams have lost their destroyers at this stage. Now it's around this point, as you can see, Isham, it used to be called Darnith, but then he changed his username to be Isham Gamer. But sometimes for some reason my brain's still like, it's Darnith, it's not, no it's not. Anyway, he pulls into this kind of sort of bow tanking position. But like I said, this isn't quite as good as that sort of thing as the Moskva once was. Although, as it turns out, the Thunderer is firing HE because, of course, even though the Thunderer's AP shells are very nasty, but of course the HE is still quite nasty as well. It's just with that slower rate of fire and lower barrel count than Conqueror, you're generally better off with the AP shells, but for most people, thinking about what shell type to use is apparently a bit too difficult, so anyway. So he does set a double fire, and Darnith could have potentially extinguished that, but chose to just let it burn. He does have one heal left. I personally would have probably put that fire out, especially as the Thunderer was so low health and about to get taken down. But maybe he wasn't counting on that. Maybe he was just being extra cautious and hoping that he wouldn't you know, put the fire out and then immediately get set on fire again, which would be jolly awkward. Now this is a bit of an awkward turn again, and he dodges some incoming shots there from the other battleship, but it's the Yamato that actually does land a hit, although it's not a very big one, so yeah, he just has to get unspotted again, because broadside is not a good place to be in this cruiser. It just isn't, and it isn't a good place to be in basically all cruisers. So I think, though, his intent was to get into the mid-cap, because now the enemy team have flipped the D-cap once again, putting them just about neck and neck on points. And they're not even that far apart on ships now. So he really does want to get into this cap, but he's forced into a rather awkward maneuver around these little islands in order to do it. The good news for them, though, is that GK is quite low health. The Yamato isn't that much better off, but their own Yamato is also quite low health, and their carrier is absolutely making the best of their ships being split apart, because they've just finished off the Montana as their own midway finishes off the low health GK. And they're pretty much neck and neck on points at this stage, and there's 3.5 minutes left to go. It's not totally inconceivable that the enemy team could win this, but it would probably come down to their carrier taking out these last couple of ships, or else the Yamato landing some really lucky strikes. But as the Yamato is well away from their carrier, they're not sharing their AA at all, whereas Isham and the Yamato are close enough that they can share AA a bit. But with the island in the way at the moment, that's not going to happen because AA cannot fire through islands, although they do open up just as the planes pull back from their attack withdraw. You know what I mean. They've made their attack and now they're going home. There's probably some more elegant way to say that, but anyway. This has not been my most cogent, or I can't even think of the word. It's not been my best, you know, commentary that I've ever done, but anyway, some days my brain just doesn't quite fire on all the cylinders that it does on other days, and this is clearly one of those days. So yeah, you're getting about a 3/4 brain commentary right now, but that's better than no commentary at all, right? Maybe, I don't know. So yeah, Yamato's now critically low health, obvious target for the midway, but they don't quite get the kill, and with his own AA helping out, he manages to help take out a lot of those remaining players. Well, I say a lot, it's the squad sizes of that midway are not particularly big at this point, although having said that, apparently they've conserved their rocket planes enough to be able to field a full squad. It's just there are other attack planes that aren't doing so well. But now the Yamato's dead, it really is just a case of killing the midway, and they've got this. They've only got a minute and change to do it. However, with 2 of the caps, surely it's fine. Well, if it was a bit closer on time, he's just killed the Yamato this midway. If it was a bit closer on time, there would maybe be the potential they'd win this. 2 caps apiece. And if the Yamato had stayed still, not the Yamato, the midway had stayed still behind the island instead of coming out into the open where they could be shot at, they would still have been vulnerable to strikes from the Allied carrier, but that might not have been enough to kill them. As it is though, because they strayed out into the open, Isham was able to get those shots into the side, rack up a whole heap more damage, and get that 3rd and final kill. So apart from that one early moment when he lost way too much health, and then maybe the slightly questionable moment where he was trying to get into the cap and ended up giving broadside for a moment too long to 2 battleships, I think that was overall a pretty decent game in terms of how it went down. And you can see how many people were over 2k base XP in that one as well. That was a real war of attrition, that game, and it absolutely could have gone the other way right up to the last dying seconds of the game. And like I said, if that midway had just stayed hidden, if they'd stayed behind cover where they couldn't have been hit by enemy guns, even if they'd been spotted by the Allied carrier, potentially they could have managed to ride out that last minute or so and actually make it a win for their side, which would have been pretty gutting for Isham and his entire team. But equally, this loss was probably gutting for the enemy team because both sides fought this one really quite hard, although Isham's team seemed to have the upper hand in ships a lot of the time, but not necessarily in map control. It was kind of going back and forth between the 2 teams quite a lot. So that's it for this replay. I should note this was actually a prior patch one, hence there being no little cinematic thing at the end, so apologies for that. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and if you did, you can do all the usual things down underneath the video, and of course, as always, stay tuned for more.